Welcome, everyone, to another edition of The Countdown. I'm Bill Ritter with Eyewitness News of wabc-tv, and we bring you The Countdown on our digital platforms, ABC7 and Y. The fifth Democratic presidential debate happening Wednesday night, November 20th in Atlanta. President Trump, again, will be front and center at this debate, or at least the impeachment proceedings against him will be front and center. Will this, at some point in our nation's history, be a kind of litmus test? You know, a what did you do in the war, daddy kind of question? Like, how did you feel about the time in 2019 when a president asked the head of a foreign country to investigate a political rival in the U.S., and all that did by withholding foreign aid to Ukraine was benefit Russia? Will that be one of those questions? Maybe. And if you're one of those political rivals, how do you handle that in a political debate as you try to elbow out of the way your political rivals, people in your own party? Joining us to discuss all that and more, political consultant Hank SHEINKOPF here in New York. In Washington, ABC News political director Rick Klein. We're going to have three embeds as well. Molly Nagel, embedded with the Biden campaign. She's in Washington, along with Cheyenne HASLETT on the left with the Warren campaign, also in Washington. And Justin Gomez with the Pete Buttigieg campaign. He's in New York. I will get to the embeds in just a few minutes. But we're going to begin with Hank and Rick. And gentlemen, let's talk about what it's going to be like this Wednesday night, November 20th, on the debate from Atlanta for these candidates. Rick, what's going to happen? It's all about, you know, Medicare for all? Maybe not. It's going to be about the impeachment proceeding.
It's such an interesting, because it's not a split screen doesn't even capture it, Bill. I feel like you need 3 or 4 screens to keep all the goings on. Keep in mind, you're not even going to have Deval Patrick or Michael Bloomberg on the stage either. So it's really an incomplete portrait. I am struck by how much the campaign continues to be about Elizabeth Warren. She's been jousting with billionaires recently. You hear implicit critiques of her or explicit critiques from Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg. And I think even the fact that the field is still expanding with what qualifies as moderates these days, that's a reflection of concern about Elizabeth Warren. So to the extent that the candidates are talking about each other on stage, I feel like Elizabeth Warren is going to be literally and figuratively front and center. And
she's doing battle, Hank, you know, real battle, political battle with these billionaires, and she's saying, bring it on. She's not shying away from it.
What this tells you, and I think Rick's entirely right, what it tells you is that Americans want change. The Democratic Party, Democrats have a kind of edge and turnout. They want change. They're not prepared to take the same thing again and again and again. Elizabeth Warren meets change and right head on. And the fact that the impeachment hearings are going on at the same time, well, it's her show. All she's got to do is smile and be Elizabeth Warren.
She may not like billionaires, but these are kind of liberal guys. You know, they're strong Democrats and progressive Democrats. Not as progressive as Warren and Sanders.
Yeah, but the attack on corporations is pretty clear. Trump represents that world. The Democrat world is the other side of it. We're moving to the left in the Democrat Party, right in the Republican Party, and that center is opening up, but it doesn't fit a Democrat or a Republican necessarily. That's the danger in what's happening to this political system and how brittle it is right now.
Rick, what do you think this is all done for Joe Biden? He's not the strongest candidate. He never was, we should all point out, but he has not done great in this campaign so far. And the stuff with Hunter Biden, I think, no matter your political stripes, you know, is kind of disturbing. A son of a president, of a vice president, a sitting vice president, making some big money off a country that is in turmoil.
Yeah, and I think the impeachment proceedings, to the extent that it puts Hunter Biden and Joe Biden front and center in that negative light, not a great thing, even though in the context of this debate, none of the candidates are likely to attack him for it. It does contribute to a sense of swampiness around Joe Biden that he could probably better not have around him. And I think the whole backdrop of impeachment is a complicated one, because on one level, you have members of Congress making the same case that he'd like to make, that this is a man that is unfit for the presidency. On another level, so much of it centers on Biden family relationships. And if Republicans get their way, we'll continue to be talking about Joe and Hunter Biden for the foreseeable couple of months.
And that's not going to help him at all. And that's why he's slipping in the polls.
Trump wins based upon eviscerating his opponents. It's Slow Joe, who's corrupt now.
Little Michael.
Little Michael. Although with Bloomberg, that's not going to work so well. And that's the point of this, what I'm trying to say. It's Pocahontas, Howdy Doody for Buttigieg. Hey, it works. It won't work with Bloomberg because he's much more stoic, and he's got the firepower.
Right, and he's worth $51.2 billion, which of course makes Trump furious when he sees that he's not worth that kind of money.
Can Bloomberg play in this? That's the other question. He's not going to be on the debate stage, but his presence will be there. Why? The dough. He'll be up on the air. Okay, he'll be all over social media by that time. He's filing in states. And by the way, Mike Bloomberg is really the antidote to Elizabeth Warren if Democrats want to do that.
Do you think he's getting in the race?
I think he gets in the race, and I think he He should not be counted on. I'll tell you why. Because a few months ago, we had a fella whose name we couldn't pronounce from a state that has very few people in it, in a city that most of us never go to, suddenly become a household name among Democrats. Anything is possible.
We are talking, of course, about South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And Rick, do you think Buttigieg has done a lot better? He's not anywhere near the higher front runners in terms of that, but he's rising. And in terms of a middle of the road, young, futuristic kind of candidate, he's got momentum.
First in a poll in Iowa, second in a poll in New Hampshire just in the last couple of days.
Right.
Now, he may have big problems beyond that where African-American voters start to come into the picture, but that is quite an impressive run. I was in Iowa a couple of weeks ago, saw the organization firsthand. It's real. The enthusiasm around him is real, and it's not just young people, a lot of older voters as well, as Justin Gomez is going to talk about, I'm sure, in a few minutes. It's really striking to see what he has accomplished in a pretty short period of time in the national landscape, and he is for real, and I think you have to put him right now in a top 4 of candidates with some people that have a lot more experience than he does. Right,
and of course in the national numbers I was referring to, the polling, he's far below that, still in the single digits or barely in the double digits, not near, let's say, Elizabeth Warren. But you're right, he has risen up. What do you think about Michael Bloomberg? Is he going to get in? I asked Hank directly. Do you think he's going to get into this race?
Yeah, I think he's in. I think he's going to be in soon. It's just a question of the timing at this point. The fact that they're already spending money. He's already put himself on the ballot in a couple of key places. They're gearing up for this to happen, and I think it reflects a lot of the angst in the Democratic Party that people around Michael Bloomberg continue to tell him, even though we've got 20-something candidates, run.
Is age a factor here, Hank? You got now another 70-something-year-old running for president.
Well, it might be as you go further down the road. I mean, Bernie Sanders collapsed to Elizabeth Warren, who's really not that much younger, but looks younger and has more energy.
Well, she's
right?
7 years younger.
She's 7 years old. Okay.
8 years younger than Bernie.
Oh, 8 years. Okay. Well, that's not bad at all. She's 70 years old, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have...
I know several people who are very close to that.
Me too. Then you have, let's see, Bernie, he's kind of fallen asleep again, and Biden. Biden, was the age issue what took him down? No, it was Hunter Biden that took him down, and it was the fact he couldn't raise any money.
And to be fair, on the Republican side, you have Donald Trump, who's 72 years old, and you have Bill Weld, who's in his 70s.
Both in their 70s. You know, age seems not to be the factor. What seems to be the factor is newness. New ideas, something new. Elizabeth Warren, as a national player, is a new phenomenon.
And I certainly don't I want to imply that age should be a factor or is a factor. In fact, Rick, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sitting next to Bernie Sanders and forming a political partnership with him.
Yeah, look, age is a factor if voters want it to be, but maybe with all these 70-somethings running, it just is not topmost in voters' minds going up against a president who himself was the oldest ever elected. People have to be judged on their own merits with these things. Of course, there is a striking contrast here between those 70-somethings and someone like Mayor Pete Buttigieg, that if you're looking for an alternative, it might be something that's compelling.
And if you're a young person, let's be honest here, if you're a young person, a millennial, for instance, who's going to be very active, much more active than they have been before, voting in this election, you're going to say, wait a minute, you have all these 70-year-olds. Don't we want someone running in the country, this is what the millennials may be thinking, who's young and who's with it and who's got a 50-year future, 60-year future ahead of them? Is that going to be a kind of thinking that some people in America will have? Rick?
That's definitely the Buttigieg argument. He says, look, the boomers have screwed up the country sufficiently. Let's leave the country in the hands of people that might do something about it. And I think it might be a compelling message. Then again, I've heard even older voters say, you know what, I don't want someone in my generation to be there. So I don't know that it cuts pretty cleanly around generational lines.
Hank, it reminds me of the Ronald Reagan line, right? In the presidential debate with Walter Mondale say, I'm not going to let my age be a factor. I'm not going to criticize my opponent, Walter Mondale, for his youth and experience.
The issue is simple. I think it's simpler than we're trying to make it. Rick is right. There are issues the millennials and others want to talk about. Climate change is a big one, okay? Public health is a big one.
Because they can't afford it.
Guns are a big one. Guess what candidate comes into the race and can talk about all three and has frankly, a record of accomplishment, putting his money where his mouth is. If he can figure out how to deal with stop and frisk, which is the real problem he has, then Bloomy is in the game.
Okay, a big round table quickly between you guys. What do you look for as a big highlight? Who needs to do something big? Rick, we'll start with you at this debate.
I'm looking at the fact that people are already falling off the stage. Julian Castro isn't part of it right now. Man, where's Kamala Harris been? Where's Cory Booker been? How about Amy Klobuchar? What is their next act? Because if this is becoming a four-person race with some new entries who are coming on board, what prevents any of them from becoming the next Beto O'Rourke or the next Julian Castro, where you're suddenly very quickly, almost overnight, struggling for relevance? What about Kamala Harris? That, to me, those are the people that may have more pressure on them than anyone.
Okay, Hank?
Simple. Elizabeth Warren will benefit no matter what happens. Why? Because she's been benefiting to date. She's the only one who's on that stage who is pretty clear, consistent, and has the gender argument going her direction.
And will she bend on the Medicare for all issue?
Well, that's really the question, by the way. And that is the question, and we'll see what she does.
Okay. Hank, will she? I mean, Rick, will she? Quick answer.
Well, she's already starting to sand away some of the distinctions with a kind of ramp-in period. A lot of people around her are convinced that she's for real on this, but some people will say that she, as soon as Bernie is out of the race, she may change her tune. You
know what? We have 200 brands of toothpaste that Americans can choose between. I think Americans don't like the way they take away their choice. Would you want one private insurance company taking over the insurance for the entire country? Would you want one government taking it over? Americans like choice, for better or worse. I'm not drawing a judgment about that, and I think that's going to be a big issue. Hank SHEINKOPF, Rick Klein, thank you very much for joining the Countdown. We're going to see you again next time, and certainly next Sunday on Up Close. Thanks for joining us, guys. And we continue the Countdown. Thanks for staying with us. We are going to now talk to the ABC News embeds, who are embedded with the presidential campaigns of all the candidates, and we have three of them with us tonight representing the Biden, Warren, and Buttigieg embed contingent. We're going to start with Molly Nagel, who's embedded with the Biden campaign. And Molly, you have been with this Biden campaign for a long time now. What's the status? How is he reacting to he's the center stage in the impeachment hearings. You heard what we talked about with Rick and Hank about how this is probably hurting him. And his campaign is not exactly on fire. So what's the take from there?
Well, the campaign has really not reacted to the impeachment hearings. We haven't seen a statement come out from the campaign or anything to that effect. What we have seen is them launch a counter-messaging website where they essentially aggregate news articles that fact-check the Ukraine situation. So clearly the campaign is trying to keep a low profile in the midst of impeachment. They want to make sure that the focus stays on Donald Trump, and perhaps they think commenting on impeachment could put them back at center stage. And even when we hear Joe Biden talk about impeachment, which we have heard him speak about it a few times since the impeachment hearings this past week, he talks about it in terms of, it shows you exactly what I've said all along, that Donald Trump broke the law and committed an impeachable offense by asking foreign governments to interfere in our election, that this isn't about him, this is about Donald Trump and what he did. So they're clearly trying to kind of wave the focus off of Biden, despite the fact that you're hearing his name quite a bit as these impeachment hearings continue. Yeah,
and a lot of Americans, I think, if I'm reflective of one of those, because I'm looking at it with no horse in the race, and I'm just seeing as an average American trying to figure all this out. If you're the vice president, do you have your son be on the board of directors of a company that's doing business and is making a lot of money all of a sudden in one of these hotbed countries of the world, a focal point between Russia and the United States? Is that a proper thing to do? And I think most Americans would say, probably should recuse himself of those kinds of money-making schemes. The son should, anyway.
Well, the voters I've spoken to out on the trail who are undecided, they kind of are a little mixed on this. They all agree that Joe Biden, they don't think did anything wrong. They think that, maybe Hunter should have recused himself if he's saying, I didn't do anything wrong, but if I'm elected president, I'm not going to do that in the future. That's kind of hard for them to circle that square. But for the most part, none of the undecided voters that I've spoken to at Biden events and outside of Biden events say that this is necessarily disqualifying for them when it comes to Biden. It might raise some questions for them down the line that when it really comes down to it, could this be a deciding factor? But at this moment, nobody is counting Biden out from my conversations based on this alone.
Right, and of course, let me just reiterate that no wrongdoing was found by even the Ukrainian prosecutor out there in this case, and I want to reiterate that. What do you think that the former vice president has to do this Wednesday at the debate? What is it? What's his primary focus now?
You know, I think Biden needs to have a strong debate. This is going to be the second debate that we see him come out onto the stage, not as really the sole front runner. We saw it last debate with him and Elizabeth Warren both kind of sharing and trading off in that top spot in the polls. And that's a blessing and a curse for Joe Biden, quite frankly. You always want to be the person on top. You want to be the guy out in front. But we really saw a lot of attention being shifted to Elizabeth Warren. And I think that Biden felt like he benefited from that. He said he felt good after the last debate. He was happy to see that some of Warren's policies were getting a critical look from some of his opponents as well. So I think you're going to continue to see him trying to hammer on the subject of Medicare for all, especially since we've now seen Warren explain how she's going to pay for it and attempt to explain how she's going to pass it.
And yet, a final question, Molly. You know, it's the Biden campaign itself that has given rise to some of these more moderates that are saying, looking out on the outside, like Deval Patrick and Michael Bloomberg, and even the rumors of Hillary Clinton saying, you know, we got to do something about this. Is he reacting at all to that? Do you think he feels the breadth of people behind him coming up close?
This is a tough thing for Joe Biden. These are people that he knows and has relationships with. Yeah. He knows Michael Bloomberg. He knows Deval Patrick. They both are close with former President Obama. Biden is keeping a tight lid on this and not really tipping his hand one way or the other when he's asked about it. He welcomed Michael Bloomberg to the race. He said it was up to Michael Bloomberg to make his case to the American people. We haven't really heard him react yet to Deval Patrick. Deval Patrick, of course, praising Biden, but saying that he doesn't think his message meets the moment. So I think it's got to be tough for him, but he's trying to keep it above board right now in public. All
right, Molly, who spends every day with the Biden campaign covering it, and we appreciate your insight. You mentioned Elizabeth Warren, and we want to go to Cheyenne HASLETT, who's embedded with the Warren campaign. Cheyenne, welcome back to the countdown. You know, the front runner now, I think it's pretty safe to say, is the candidate you're covering. What do you think she has to do this debate on Wednesday, and how do you react to her reaction, or what's your take on her reaction to Michael Bloomberg and Deval Patrick?
You know, I think that she has to be ready during this debate to take a lot of heat on Medicare for all. And we saw, like Molly was just saying in the last debate, that Warren absolutely came across as more of a frontrunner because she was taking hits from basically all sides on that stage, from a handful of candidates. Yes, Joe Biden, but also Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke. So this time around, hands down, having released two critical parts of her Medicare for All plan, the funding and the transition, we are going to see a lot of attacks on that. And I'm sure just on a number of other issues, you know, that she's come out with and that she has been attacked by other, you know, members of the public, like her wealth tax.
And her take on Medicare for all as the government as the sole practitioner of health care. She gave indications that she was thinking about changing that and maybe just having it be a public option and having the competition be out there for several providers of health care. Is that going to happen, do you think?
Well, you know, it's always a conversation about what can actually get passed. And we actually, to your previous question about Deval Patrick, when we were following her around in New Hampshire when he filed just to make that deadline the other day, he said a line about Elizabeth Warren. He said it's different advancing an agenda when you're actually elected than when you're running a campaign. And of course, that's the question around Medicare for all, is will this pass even if Democrats get control of the House and the Senate? It's an open question.
Right, and that's always the case. And you know, Barack Obama wanted this Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and he couldn't get a public option. The Republicans wouldn't give it to him, so they passed it without him. And that's what happens when you become president. You usually have to make some deals, and that's what Elizabeth Warren is going to have to do. One thing you're looking for, that we should look for in this debate from Elizabeth Warren?
I think it's how strongly she stands behind Medicare for all and how she points out that difference between her and Bernie Sanders on this, because they really do now have some daylight on this key plan, one of the most important issues to voters. Okay,
Cheyenne HASLETT, thank you for your insight as the embed in the Warren campaign. And we hear for our first time on this program, the countdown, from Justin Gomez. He is with the Pete Buttigieg campaign. Justin, first, welcome to wabc-tv and ABC7 NY and the countdown. So tell, you know, your candidate is sort of the hot guy right now and has risen in the polls, certainly in Iowa and New Hampshire. He's done very well in those polls. What are you looking for him to do on this debate November 20th?
Yeah, Bill, thanks for having me. For this upcoming debate, look for Mayor Pete Buttigieg to continue those attacks on Senator Elizabeth Warren and her Medicare for All plan. It's something that he did in Ohio at that debate, and I don't see him leaving those lines of attacks for this one. He knows it's a strong argument that he has as sort of a more moderate candidate this time around, and he knows that voters out there are looking for someone who is also going to offer an option to keep their private insurance. It's something that he hears repeatedly at his town halls and at his events, and I think that's one of his strongest points in how he's going to differentiate himself from Elizabeth Warren and keep that argument going well into this debate.
You heard your boss, political director of ABC, Rick Klein, say that Buttigieg was selling the fact that all the people above him in the polls are in their 70s and he's 37, and he wants to use that as a selling point, especially to younger Americans. Say, hey, I'm in your generation, I'm going to be here for a long time.
Yeah, he's selling that a lot to a lot of younger voters. It's also winning over a lot of older voters, as Rick was saying. A lot of older voters at his events are saying that I'm at that age, I can't picture somebody else who is my age running the country. So he's winning over a lot of them. And he's also saying that a lot of these candidates, the candidates such as Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and some of the other senators such as like Kamala Harris and Senator Cory Booker have all been in Washington. He's also selling that point that he is the Washington outsider who can come in and make a change. He says that those who have been on Capitol Hill have left ticking time bombs for people in his generation, and it's up to him to go and fix them before they go off.
Great insight to all of you, all three of you. We're going to see you all three together again if we can, if it's possible. Good. We're about to say goodbye. Anything that you were dying to say that I didn't ask you that you just have to say? Molly, we'll start with you. Yes or no? You don't have to if you don't want to.
Well, I just want to point out one fun fact about this debate. It's actually going to take place on Joe Biden's 77th birthday, November 20th. So as we talk about age in this, he will be 1 year older on the debate stage.
That's a good point. I wonder how much the other candidates will play that up. Cheyenne, your last point?
The day after the debate, we're interested in seeing what this big rally Elizabeth Warren has planned. She's going to make a big speech in Atlanta, and we don't have all the details on that yet, but we did see her Washington Square Park speech there in New York where you are, and that was obviously a really big deal for her campaign, for her trajectory, the crowd size, etc. So we'll see how that plays out in Atlanta, in a different part of the country.
She stayed for like 4 or 5 hours afterwards taking selfie pictures, as is her wont. And Justin, your final thought?
Look out for the other candidates to go after Mayor Pete Buttigieg at this debate as well. With him rising in the polls in Iowa and New Hampshire, he's going to be a new target for everybody else as he stays close to the center of the stage. So he has to be ready to defend all of his policies that he's putting out there. All right. So Justin, Molly, Cheyenne, thank you for your insights. You guys are doing something just remarkable, embedding yourselves with these candidates and in the campaigns and giving us a real sense of what's happening there. So we really appreciate you being on Countdown, and good luck for the rest of the campaigns to all three of you.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of The Countdown. We're going to see you next time. For all of us here on Eyewitness News, WABC TV, and our website, and all of our platforms, ABC7NY, thanks for watching, and goodbye.